Good morning and welcome everyone to the Maine Event, which today is a legal clinic. And I'm really pleased to be joined by Emma Griffiths, who is a partner at Draper Lang. Emma, hi.
Hi, Mita. Thanks for having me today.
A real pleasure to have you on board. And I have to say, Emma, with everything that we're planning on talking about today, I'm really glad that we've got an expert in the room who can give us the reality of not only what we're doing, but the implications and what employers should be watching out for, because we're all here, we're all on the same team, everybody wants to help their people back to work, but there's a lot to consider, isn't there?
Absolutely. There's so many considerations. And I think the most important takeaway from this is there is no one size fits all. Every organisation is going to have different priorities, different needs. And so it's about tailoring your approach to your own workforce.
Brilliant. So as always, I'll do a quick bit of housekeeping. So we try to keep these sessions short but sweet, 30 to 40 minutes max. And to make them really effective, we have a chat box here that will allow anyone to have interaction, ask questions, make comments, and hopefully that will mean that you can go away with answers that you can apply straight into your workplace now. We also have a poll, which some of you all have already been giving us your thoughts to. And this really covers what we're going to be looking at today and what your thoughts are, because as we said, we know that to get engagement and productivity, happiness and success, we need to work together. And so much has shifted. You know, we've done a real life, real-time exercise on how employers can get the best out of their people whilst creating better retention tools, all in the middle of a pandemic. So, Emma, have you ever seen such a change in the way the workspace has been utilised? And
I think we can all comfortably say that nobody in our lifetime has seen such a seismic change.
Yeah.
It's really interesting that when the current government were trying to be elected, one of their pledges was around the employment bill and changes to workplace. And one of the things they said they were going to do was make flexible working the default. Now that was back in 2019, and everybody laughed and said, well, that's never going to be a thing. And clearly the pandemic has made flexible working, I think, the default for many organizations.
Yeah. And I guess, we know how much pain people have been through. So I don't want to make this comment flippantly, but if there is a silver lining for business, it is that actually in the face of the double bubble of Brexit and the pandemic, flexible working will facilitate them to attract and retain better talent for longer, which is only going to enhance their success in the organisation.
I think that's absolutely right, because actually when you look at some of the positives, you don't have that geographical risk of somebody moves away. They don't necessarily move away from your organisation, and your talent pool suddenly becomes, if not the whole country, then it becomes global.
Yeah.
Many organisations. There are problems that go alongside that with tax and everything else, but absolutely, the talent pool is huge, and if you've got the right culture, you retain better.
And that's exactly what this poll is about, is that if you are keeping office space, what is that prime purpose going to be for that office space? So the options we have are traditional workspace or a collaborative hub. And it's interesting, I saw a collaborative hub as a social environment, and Emma said, actually, I saw it as a professional environment. And so straight away, that identifies that not only explain to your people what you're doing, but explain why. Explain the benefits, because people will perceive it from their angle, and therefore you may not be able to create the impact for your workspace that you want to, or use it as that supportive environment. Reinforcing identity, culture and brand is another option, and currently running at 50% of the votes going towards that. And then the fourth option was a place to meet each other / human connection, because I don't know about you, Emma, I'm very fortunate to have a separate space that I can sit at with a desk and a chair, but not everyone, that's not a given, is it?
No, I think it's not. And I think that's one of the things that, and I've listened to a few podcasts actually recently about the future of work and what work looks like. And one of the things coming out of it actually is there is a real distinction between the people that have got to a certain point in their career and maybe have the space at home or have the freedom and flexibility at home to work from home. And it might work better for them. They might have children, they might have caring responsibilities. Then there's another demographic of people often in their early 20s who are in flat shares, house shares, for whom working from home is and has been a very miserable experience, and they want to get in. But also, actually, regardless of your circumstances, I want to be in the office and seeing people at the very least a couple of times a week, which I think is just great for mental health, if nothing else.
Indeed. So it is a bit of it's not as you said, not one size does not fit all. and anything is possible. But at the same time, with all of these endless possibilities, there is a risk for slip-ups, discrimination, people not feeling fairly treated, and that could bring a whole range of lawsuits that employers didn't even foresee coming. And I think that's what we're going to be talking about today, is how to engage in a sort of consistent and supportive way that protects you as a business as well at the same time.
I think the first thing is to think about, how to bring people back to the office, because we've talked about bringing people back to work, but actually they've been working all the time. Everybody has been working, and it presupposes, it's to say they've not been working isn't right. So people have been, and they've been in the organisations just remotely and differently. So it's actually about, the bigger question, I think, is what does the workplace look like now? And I think most people will give you the answer of, well, hybrid, 3 days in, 2 days at home. I think that's quite simplistic analysis, and we need to go deeper than that. And as the poll looks at today, what are we going to use the workspace for? Because actually, if you are coming all the way in and doing your commute, but actually you're then spending your day on video calls in the office.
Or there's nobody in your team around, or, it can be counterproductive, can't it?
Absolutely. So I think you have to very sensibly think about what your workplace is going to look like, what you're going to use it for, how you're going to use it. Always the best employee relations approach is to talk to your employees about that. What do they want of their work to look like? How does it work best for them? And I think, again, it's not just one company. You've got to look at the different teams as well, because a finance team might say need to come in at the end of the month to work together on something, or at particular times in the financial year, and there's benefit in physical presence. There might be an advertising or a creative agency where they need a brainstorm once a week, a couple of times a month, where, again, bouncing ideas around the room might be more valuable. There's also a suggestion that those collaborative ideas are better done online, because everybody has an equal platform.
Oh, how interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff that's coming out around that, and actually saying that perhaps more junior voices or people from minorities may feel better represented online, because when somebody is chairing a meeting online, they tend to give more emphasis to ensuring everybody speaks equally, rather than round a room, when often it's just the loudest or the more senior voices perhaps get heard.
And that is so interesting, because that isn't something I'd really, of course, one size doesn't fit all, but actually what you're saying here is it has to be holistic. You've got to look at what the outcomes are that you're trying to achieve, not just on a corporate strategy level, but on a business and organizational strategy. And it's got to feed through. And I think that comes back to communicating to each team and individual, from the managers, why we are creating this work.
It's not about, in my view, it's not really about mandating people back. It's about engaging and motivating them back. And you talked about the claims that might flow, and we can talk about a few of those, but they will typically flow from the attitude of forcing people back. Where people are happy, they don't tend to bring claims against their organisation. It tends to be when they're not happy. And you can absolutely bring people back ultimately through mandating and forcing people to come back and saying it's a requirement of the role, we need you in. But you are going to have issues, and you're going to have issues from an engagement perspective, but also potential legal issues.
There's 3 areas that we're covering in that space today. So first of all, which is what we've already been talking about, and we'll go into a bit more detail, is on how to get your people back. So looking at things like reassuring people, health and safety checks, flexible working. You've already talked about the fact that it's not, it can't be one size fits all. And then what I listed in the invite as draconian do's and don'ts, because some employers, well, if they're not mandating, how else are we going to keep that control? So it's looking at them in we all need some form of monitoring. And you and I, we were talking before about job descriptions and how to facilitate what good looks like. And then the impact of all of this, which is that actually a lot of the monitoring could lead to favoritism, discrimination. Again, the benefit of hybrid working is that, from an equality and diversity space, and you talked about inclusivity as well in meetings, people can really not only have a seat at the table, but a voice at the table. And companies could set it all up right, but in practice, it might not actually be, authentic to getting those outcomes. So I think it's about that consistency. So let's dig a little bit more into getting people back to work, and we know that hybrid seems to be, we as a consultancy on the recruitment side, are probably recruiting 75 to 100 different roles a month. Of those roles, many are contract and temporary because businesses want to kind of catch up and they want to, push forward. But at the same time, they're still dealing with the challenges of the pandemic. But what's interesting about the permanent roles is that people are literally saying, if it's not partly hybrid, I'm not interested. And we know there's a war on talent. I mean, how do employers, what would your advice be, looking at it from an employment law perspective and what's shifted and changed? What would you say to employers?
I think so you're absolutely right in terms of it's now the right term, buyer's market, is that the way right around? It's the employees market. And you're absolutely right. Employers are not going to get the best talent if they don't consider the flexible working. So I think that's less about law and more about practicalities and pragmatism. In terms of bringing your existing workforce back, as well as the engagement and the motivation, consultation. So talking to people about when they want to be in, talking to employee forums. If you have employee forums, you might want to set one up for that purpose. Yeah, talking to a trade union if you have a recognised trade union, reassuring people that they are safe at work. So that as an employer, one of the things you touched on is health and safety. You obviously have a duty to provide a safe place of work. Yeah. So reassuring people that actually you are following the guidance, everything is safe.
So having a policy, because I know that, just this morning they're speaking of removing all isolation, all rules around COVID. And yet I know that employees still, not necessarily comfortable. There may be people who have protected illnesses that they need to shield from, or, how can employers reinforce that they have created a safe space for their people? Yeah.
I think it's really tricky, and actually we do get clients that are contacting us saying, majority of people are back in in a hybrid fashion, or we've agreed whatever pattern we've agreed with them, but there's a couple of people we physically need in the office at least a number of days a week, and they will not come back in because they're concerned about health and safety. And that's where you get into really difficult situations. I mean, if somebody's got a disability, you've got a duty to provide a reasonable adjustment. So is continuing flexible working a reasonable adjustment if, for example, they're at a heightened risk of complications from COVID, if, for example, there's a medical reason why they can't be vaccinated due to their disability? Employers absolutely need to take a case-by-case approach, because if you apply a blanket, everybody comes in or you lose your jobs, real draconian approach, you are going to have claims, and you are probably going to have successful discrimination claims. And there are times I think employers might just have to take a deep breath and say, do you know what, we might need to extend this home working for this person for a period of time, because still the world is in a state of flux, and review it at that point. I think the other thing that always underpins every employment relationship is what's called the implied term of trust and confidence. So you'll have heard of constructive dismissal. Yeah. So constructive dismissal is basically where an employer acts so unreasonably that they have breached this implied term of mutual trust and confidence. So they will behave as a reasonable employer. And the employer's acted so badly as to breach that, which entitles you to resign and say, I've had enough of this, I'm off, but you've constructively dismissed me. Yeah. So you've made it impossible for me to stay. That's exactly the language. You've made it impossible for me to remain at work. So you've dismissed me. So actually, if an employer unreasonably tries to force somebody back into work without really consulting and checking what safeguards, what changes they could make, then the risk that they face when the employee has over 2 years service is a constructive unfair dismissal case, because reasonableness underpins the employment relationship. And if an employer is not acting reasonably, they run that risk. And I think, just to add quickly to that, it is going to be harder and harder for an employer to say you can't work from home, because they've done it successfully for 2 years potentially. And that's certainly going to be the challenge employers will face. And if an employer had a blanket policy that they wanted people back, we know about some of the financial services environments have been quite black and white about it. They've pulled back a little bit now. They've realised that there'll be a massive talent drain on their world. But whereas most organisations are 2 to 3 days, these guys are saying 4 days in. And, how, as an employer, if you have a business case, does that protect you? No. So you need to you do need to take these cases on a case by case. So you need to take everybody individually. And the reason for that is the discrimination legislation, as well as constructive dismissal that we've just talked about, is also the discrimination legislation. So you cannot indirectly discriminate against somebody. If you have a policy that says everybody must be in this workspace 5 days a week, for argument's sake, then you are likely to be indirectly discriminating against perhaps people with certain disability, perhaps people with childcare commitments. So often women fall into that category. So actually, by saying, a blanket approach to anything runs an indirect discrimination risk. So you
have an intention, set an intention with some caveats.
Absolutely. You can set the intention, you can set the aim and the aspiration that that's what you want to do. You can certainly communicate quite strongly that that is what you want to do. My advice is always bring people on the journey with you.
I love what you said about consultation. I really did, because I think that, when people feel listened to, they'll also be more inclined to take on the outcomes of that consultation and work together, understanding that actually, and if an employer can explain that, look, we've done the consultation, these were the outcomes, this is what we're going to put in place, whether that's a health and safety policy with some return to work guidance and advice, and where somebody falls in between the cracks, whether it's protected characteristic or just, some temporary situation. If an employer then treats that one on a case by case basis and takes notes and records that, then hopefully there won't be a case of constructive dismissal. They will be able to demonstrate that they have been through every step to support that employee.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are times when, you've done everything, you've consulted as much as you can, but the reality is you still physically need that person in that building. And if you are confident on that, then you are more likely to succeed if a constructive unfair dismissal claim is brought against you. You're also more likely to be able to fight the indirect discrimination claims, because actually, if you've got a legitimate business aim that underpins what you're doing, and that what you are saying, what you are requiring of your employees is a proportionate means of achieving that aim, then you will be able to defeat the indirect discrimination claims. It doesn't stop, the legislation is not there to stop people from doing things and stop employers from doing things. It's to make you think twice and protect employees. But that legitimate aim and that proportionate means part of that test. So is what you're doing proportionate? Do you really, really need that person in that many days a week? Can you flex the hours? That's quite a high hurdle to get across, particularly in the context of a world where everything has been thrown out of the window for the last 2 years and we operate so differently now.
Indeed, there's actual proof of success in different working environments. So if an employer does want to change things, they've got to give the why, and they've got to bring people along on that journey. And it's quite interesting, because we then go into if people are going to be working in a remote working space, how do employers ensure that there is maximum engagement and productivity? Is it webcam monitoring, email monitoring, keystrokes, phoning and checking, doing 3 times a day check-in? What have you seen, and what are your thoughts on how employers should and shouldn't monitor their people?
So I think there needs to be a quite seismic change in how we manage people. I think executives often on the day, it's the frontline managers. So I think executives are fine, they have their overview. I think people that are working day to day are fine. It's the middle managers that have been trained through all of our workplace experience to manage by seeing, by listening to people, having their conversations, watching people physically collaborating in the workspace, having that one-to-one instant feedback and report of the office that gives you a sense of who somebody is and how they work. And that has gone. And I think there is if we try and replicate that with technology, that there's probably a mistake there, because actually if what you're trying to do is make sure that little green dot doesn't go off on your Slack, which, let's face it, somebody can walk up, wiggle the mouse and walk away again as often as they want. But if you're looking at that, if you're looking at keystrokes, if you're sitting watching somebody on I would find that so miserable if I was being watched all day on a webcam. I think that there are merits to that in terms of you can see what is being done. But I think
it's black and white, isn't it? For many employers, they think, I can see them at their desk, they're working. I can't see them at their desk, they're not working. But we know that's not the reality. And I talk a lot about, and both of us used a word which was output, and actually defining a role on what good looks like. So what kind of tools would you put in place to help managers, and it's so true what you said about managers needing to evolve the way they manage. And that's the other part of our world, which our training side has been so much around helping managers be successful in a hybrid working world, because everything changes.
Absolutely. And I think this is where we've got a lot to learn from the global businesses that have been doing this pre-pandemic, because pretty much everybody else, there's a big change, isn't there? Whereas actually there's some businesses that have been doing this all the time. So it's worth really as a world of work as a community actually trying to understand. And a lot of that talks about moving to outcomes-based management. So actually, what do you need somebody to achieve? What is a reasonable output? And when do you need it? And actually managing on the basis of that, not so much, are you there 9 to 5? Because actually, it doesn't matter if you want to walk the dog first, if you need to do something on a school run, if you need to drop something off at a chemist, as long as you come back and you are delivering the outcomes. I think that's the challenge that brings across is the perception that people are being treated differently. And that's a challenge to manage, because you see that in an office environment anyway, don't you? If somebody's allowed to pop out for something or, whatever, people might feel they're being treated differently and they're being favoured or not by their boss.
They're not objective. Yeah. And again, I guess, having a lawyer like yours, having an employment law specialist in the room gives me the opportunity to ask you what kind of slip-ups or what kind of challenges are employers facing in that space at the moment.
And actually, let's just jump back to the more draconian measures if people actually do want to use them, because actually there is a whole world away from, being on that webcam from 9 to 5 to, the occasional drop-in monitoring and using it wisely. So actually, just to talk about one of the common slip-ups is perhaps putting those steps in place without making sure you've taken account of your GDPR duties. Because you do have duties under the GDPR. Firstly, you need to think about, what the lawful purpose is for what you're doing.
Okay.
Now, that might be to make sure that you are ensuring compliance with your policies, so you can have a lawful purpose of doing this stuff. But then you need to make sure you are open and transparent about how you're using that data. So where is that data going? For example, if you're sitting on a webcam all day, are you being recorded? Who's got access to that video? How long is it being kept for? Where's it being sent? Never mind within the company, within the third-party organisation that probably facilitates it, hosts it. Is it pinging off around the world? When will there's well, actually, you think as an employee at home, you want to know where that's going and how it's being used, right?
And later, this last 5-10 years, just every bit of data that organizations are collecting is our power, isn't it? As individuals, as consumers, as employees, as humans, it's if you're going really deep, it's our choices that are being recorded and therefore potentially being controlled. But on a business level, so I just thought that the GDPR contract that we have in place with employees would cover all of that, but it doesn't.
So it does, but it's not so much a contract. So it's not about consent. Now, the GDPR used to be about consent. I give consent for you to use my data.
Yeah.
Now it's about actually telling people what you are doing with that data. So it's having a lawful purpose to use that data, being proportionate. So one of the things that underpins GDPR is not hanging on to data for any longer than you reasonably have to.
Yeah.
So actually, how long do you have to keep that before it's wiped and it's permanently wiped? It's more about communication. That is exactly the why. So it's more about communication. So it's about your privacy notice with your employees needs to set out, this is what we keep. This is where it's used. This is how long we keep it for. This is why we use it. And this is how you can ask us questions about it. And this is how you can complain to the ICO about it if you really want to.
Yeah.
The ICO, talking to them, the Information Commissioner's Office, they have a lot of really, really helpful free resources on their website to help employers navigate this. They also have a really good employers helpline. So if you are using this sort of monitoring, and we've made you panic today by saying, I haven't got this stuff in place, or you might think, well, no one really cares anyway. Actually, often employees really do. And it's only when you get into a dispute that comes up. So I encourage people to look at that ICO website and get that guidance and just see, what assistance they can help you with.
Brilliant. It's clarifying. It's remembering we're all on the same team. It's giving people room to ask questions and get satisfactory answers, and having periods of consultation where we can reflect. Nothing is a finished article, and certainly hybrid working is going to be ever evolving. You said that there are studies coming out now. There are actions and factors that have to be taken into consideration that, you know, even 3 months ago we wouldn't have thought about. I know with the GDPR, that's brilliant. And that's what we're here to do, is to create a protected and supportive working environment that allows the employer to achieve the outcomes they want to, with employees that feel safe, engaged, and therefore maximizing productivity. If only it was all black and white, but if an employer shows that they've made the intention, then if there are misunderstandings, they've tried to deal with that, it can eliminate a lot of risk, can't it, in terms of cases and
everything is about communication. Absolutely, everything is about communication, and that is a challenge in a hybrid world, because actually one of the things that we were going to talk about is discrimination risks, and one of those things is actually how do you manage people, and that links very nicely to the communication point and the challenges for managers now, because as we all know, people leave bad managers. That's why people go. So there is a real investment, I think, needed in that middle tier of management, and communication is one of the drivers, because I think if some of the studies now are showing that the days when the boss is in the office are off.
Oh, I've lost Emma. I hope that everyone.
The days people.
Sorry, Emma, I lost you for a split second there. It might have been my end, it might have been your end. But can you just repeat that sentence? Because that
you hear me now?
Yeah. So the days that people are in the office,
bosses are in the office, is the days that people often choose, if they can, subject to their life commitments and everything else, they're often the days people choose to show up. So we still subconsciously or whatever have an association with, I need to be physically present to please somebody, and clearly we still want to please people by, you know, being seen. So I think the challenge is, if you are managing people when they're there, you will probably give them that task, give them that piece of work, you build that relationship with somebody, because it's just natural and easy to give something across the desk.
It really is. And as much as I am a huge advocate for hybrid working in our business, we've embraced it. We were actually quite flexible before, but it's given us that confidence to go all in. And yet I know that if I'm sitting opposite somebody, I will move a project along much quicker than if we were working at home and not in each other's line of sight. So
I think the two challenges there is, one, how you manage that. So you've got to find a way of getting over that and using technology or whatever other structures put in place. But secondly, over time, you know, for now, it's not so much of a concern because everybody's just about getting back into whatever the new pattern is. But actually, what if you have the people that tend to be at home? Again, it's the people with the caring responsibilities. It might be somebody with a disability. It might be people with the childcare responsibilities. So again, the people that are home are potentially over time cut out of the loop. Missed out for the key projects, because actually as a manager you really want to give it to the person that you can trust to deliver it now, and you associate that trust from that physical presence. Over time that feeds into promotions, over time that feeds into bonuses, over time that feeds into a drip of discrimination. So
no one action in and of itself would reflect that, but the compound effect of it will be discriminatory.
Yeah, I think the reality is, I mean, you might have a case where there is one case and it's obvious that it's one action leads to that. But I think more than the wider concern is the unconscious. It's like unconscious bias.
Yes.
It's that unconscious
bias. Form of unconscious bias, essentially, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And it's something that, again, one of the main ways of addressing it is to become really conscious of it. And to be aware and to educate your teams that just because somebody is there, they're not necessarily doing any better, or they don't deserve any more in terms of their prospects than the person that's still delivering from home. The person from home might even be delivering better. You know, you've got to look at your team and utilize your team sensibly.
Indeed, and I think that is again where the management tools come in, of being consistent and equal in terms of the job description, what outcomes you measure, how often you engage, meet, having group catch-ups all on Zoom. I think that's fantastic. Really thinking about, you know, if you as an employer want to have that once a week when everyone's in the office, what does it do for those people that can't make it in? Again, thinking about how to overcome that or actually remove it. Does it actually add value? So again, thinking about every activity or exercise, not just, we're going to do this because it's team building, but what are the outcomes we want from this activity? And again, looking at the poll and thinking about what the office space brings. It's been moving around all the time. It's very interesting. reinforcing identity, culture, and brand is 50% of the vote at the moment. Being a collaborative hub, which we're going on the professional environment where people can collaborate. And one thing I'm noticing actually, Emma, is that people are planning their time better. So they're actually saying, okay, when I'm in the office, I'm going to do this. When I'm at home, I'm going to do this. And I think that's something that executives have been given the room to do naturally, and therefore has allowed them to probably work in their best way. But now it's been given across the board, and I think that's really powerful. So,
and I think there's also a thing, the generations, the younger generations, it's more that studies will show time and time again, for them, the value of workspace is about autonomy, making a difference, having some control over how they work and when they work and where they work, just naturally feeds into that. So hopefully you get a more engaged workforce, and everybody knows with engagement comes increased productivity and all of the good stuff that goes alongside it. And
if an employer can demonstrate that by embracing this hybrid world, they have been able to attract this number of people who are from a diverse and inclusive background, and then able to show the impact on results, engagement, employee when employee engagement surveys, and anything that can show the benefit, I actually think, what I'm seeing is that employees want to work for employers that care, and they have choices now. Maybe 2 years ago, the choice wasn't there. Caring isn't just about, hey, how are you, and putting an arm around. It's infiltrating. It's kind of trickling through every layer of an organization. The cyclical, you do this. It's a partnership and an exchange of values, and it's being able to show that all the way through.
It's a big challenge, though, isn't it? Because actually, if you have an organization that's culture, that's identity, that it is a care driven, it's an organization where everybody knows that everybody values and respects everybody. But for example, a smaller organization where that's perhaps come from the top, and that's come through being seen and known. Yeah. The challenge for those organizations is quite huge when you move to remote, because actually, how do you filter that down? How do you keep that culture? How do you keep that engagement? How do you make sure that your new employees actually are aligned to you, and that they understand the value that you attribute to them? It's put something in place.
Yeah, it's conscious engagement. You're so right. It's really thinking about the impact that every touch point has and why you need that touch point. And if you've got the outcomes really defined to start with, and I'm a big believer in getting that job description updated, or whether it's a quarterly business plan for each individual. It doesn't have to be, every element of business, but what are your objectives for your desk? Does that align with the business and what we want? Once you have that agreement and what that benefit will bring. So is the employee going for a promotion, building out their responsibilities in terms of mentoring or training somebody else in their team? Are they looking for a pay rise? But not just the what, but the why and the value exchange. People understand what they're doing and why they're doing it, and the trust builds. I think that is the biggest thing here, that when you reinforce what we're doing, why we're doing it, and then doing it, and then saying, look, this is what's been done. You've done this, we've done that. It's as we expected.
Absolutely. The trust is absolutely built on that sort of thing, isn't it? And the accountability of the employee to do the work. So for the fear from the owners that people aren't doing things, actually you've got a measure, you've got measurables to show, but also the accountability of the company to say, are we actually investing our time in people? Are we actually listening and hearing what's being said? And as you say, all of that flows into a nice virtuous circle.
Indeed, there's ever increasing circles if the right communication and the right tools are in place. So it's very exciting, because as we discussed at the start, it removes boundaries of talent, access to talent, and looking at the UK and the very unique set of talent challenges and shortage that we have. It really is time to embrace hybrid working and defining what good looks like based on outcomes rather than presenteeism, keystrokes, email monitoring, webcams, all of that. It really is about a lot, and therefore recruiting on fit drivers, people's why. And I think that's where, because in our world we have a not-for-profit charity arm and a commercial arm, and I think the not-for-profit charity arm are brilliant at saying this is who we are, this is what we do and why we do it, and therefore they attract people that, whether they're in front of the boss or not, that drive is big. It's commercial environments having the same why.
Everything I've read and everything I've heard says that purpose is the most important thing for an employee to deliver, is purpose. And if you value the job you are doing, whatever that job is, if you value it and you see the purpose in your job, then you'll perform, or you'll want to perform. And if your organization's not working for you, you'll move somewhere else. So I think the next few years are really going to be interesting for companies. There's going to be some that fail because they don't get this right, and there's going to be some that absolutely fly.
Indeed. And of course, Emma and I have spent the last half an hour. I've got a few more minutes left of today's session. We've had a quiet chat room, which I hope means that everyone's listening with interest, and we've definitely had responses on the poll. So thank you everyone for your interaction there. But Emma and I are both available outside of these sessions as well. We'll be sending a recording of today's session out to everyone, and our contact details will be there as well. So if you're thinking, yes, this is where we are, this is where we want to be, we've got a bit of a grey area in the middle, both Emma and I can help you along on that journey to make sure you do it legally, fairly, and with great successful outcomes. So exciting times, but also times that employers have to be careful about how they embrace.
And just to underline that, if there's ones where you've got particularly tricky cases and you just want to talk it through, then absolutely get in touch with us.
Wonderful. And Joellen, thank you for that you're out there and you're listening. It's very reassuring to know that what we're bringing to you as our community is valuable and on point. So at the end of this session, we will always ask for a review. If you could give us your stars and actually reply to the recording later with what else you'd like to hear, that would be really good, because we know how precious time is, and giving your time to us talking to you, we want to make sure that gives you immediate results, but also access to knowledge and expertise that might help your organization push forward. I mean, my favorite phrase now is, Emma, is organizations working not just to be good in the world, but good for the world. And I think a hybrid working space is only going to facilitate that more and more.
Absolutely.
Well, I see another session with you coming, Emma, because I would really like to pick your brains on specific cases and how they are shaping the future of hybrid working.
Yeah, and I'd be very happy to sit and do a bit of a special on different cases that are coming through. And if anybody has got any specifics that they want to ask about, we can definitely build on from there. I'm happy to do that.
Thank you so much, Emma. So I've just I've just pressed end on the poll so everyone can see those results now. And out and out, the reinforcing identity, culture and brand is the leading purpose of office space going forward, according to our network this morning. Being a collaborative hub, which we put down as professional engagement and interaction, is second. And then the place to meet each other in a human connection and the traditional workspace are both equally third. So very interesting insight there. And Emma, any comments on that?
No, it just makes me smile, doesn't it, that traditional workspace? Because if I go back 3 years, a lot of times employers would contact me having received a flexible working request was, how do I refuse this? And those same employers are the ones that are now saying, we don't need an office, we don't need everybody in. So the poll reinforces that traditional workspace has fundamentally changed. Yeah, interesting stuff. Thanks for having me along.
A huge pleasure. Thank you so much, Emma. Thank you, everyone. And Yvonne, thank you for the comment. And the fact that you said reassuring means so much, because we're all facing such unique challenges, but in this network and in this community, we can reassure each other that, what you're doing is right. And if there are gaps, you've got access to us to fix it and make sure that you run a safe and engaging working environment. So until this time next week, we will say goodbye for now. Emma, thank you so much, and have great weeks, everyone.
Pleasure. Thank you, everybody.
All the best.